published, if it's got the real names of the people and places, you might get shot and killed yourself. And so I did change the names of the people and places, not because I wasn't afraid of being shot and killed, because they all wanted the stories published. But I do now, whenever I sell a copy of that Killings book, I have a 3-page listing of the real names and the pseudonyms that were used, and I give that out to the person who told the stories, you see, or who buys the books. And it was amazing how many of those people who told me those stories about the killings, when the book came out, they or their neighbors would, who got a book, would blink through, or that is, draw a line through the name that I had used, and they would write the name of the real person or place just above it. And I saw many books of theirs, and they were just filled full of their handwritten accounts, you know, to correct me on the mistake I had made. And the interesting part was, and I guess I'm sharing too much about individual books, but the interesting part was that these killings took place in defense of personal property. Like, you slept with my wife, bang. You stole our hogs, cut their throat. You moved our fence line, bang, bang. And whenever a killing occurred, now they were not homicides or murders, the local people call them killings. And whenever a killing occurred, they seldom ever called the local sheriff. They simply formed a local community inquest committee to go to the scene of the killing to determine not the question of guilt or innocence, but the question of motive. Was it a proper motive to kill that person? If so, and if in other words, if they were forgiven on the spot, because it was justifiable what the killings that had taken place, then the person who'd done the killing, if they said it was needed, then that person was in church on the next Sunday morning if they were churchgoers. And it just goes on like that. And one of my favorite stories, from Tales from Kentucky One-Room School Teachers, and if I'm not doing the right thing.
Yeah, we need to keep, like, another person speak here.
Okay, so take it right now.
Yeah, we get the sense of how you do your research, so there we are.
Okay.
Okay, and let's hear from Ben.
Do I get to talk now?
Go right ahead.
Awesome.
I'll listen to you.
Oh, that's okay. I started out writing as soon as I could pick up a pen, and I was writing short stories. And my dad was an English teacher and a drama teacher, and I just I picked up his footsteps and started walking in them when I was a little kid. And the house that I grew up in with my sister and my brother and my mom and my dad was incredibly haunted, which means that most of us in that house invariably were haunted for the rest of our lives. We never talked about it at all. It was never a topic of conversation. Things happened. Nobody talked about it. I was visited several times by a tall, gangly guy when I was a teenager. I was spoken to, scratched, never talked about it. It basically formed the way that I look at the world. There are two worlds in this place. The one we see and the one we don't see. And the one we don't see, it's there. I promise you. But who's inhabiting it? And that's what I was really interested in. Who was it that was there? And I tumbled through a lot of different writing projects. I tried to do fiction, screenplays, and stuff like that. I always came back to writing about the paranormal. And in my heart of hearts, my book, Lost in the Darkness, was my firstborn, had always been there. I just needed to get it out. And ideally, it started out as an entirely different book than what it is now. It started out as your exploitative Ghost Adventures type book, which, looking back on it now, that's abhorrent to me, really. The book that I wrote was formed on a vacation that I took. Well, my ex-wife called it a vacation. I call it a work vacation, where I actually visited a number of these asylums. And I went into the Central State Hospital in Indianapolis and was there to take pictures. I was there to take in the atmosphere. I was there to find out whatever I could. And as I was getting ready to leave and get in my truck to leave the campus, I heard a voice behind me coming from the carpentry building that asked me, "What are you doing here?" And I looked around, nobody was there. You know, the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police, they stable their horses there. That was the only other living thing besides me on that campus, were those horses. And it never really hit me until I left that campus that something had just spoken to me and asked me a question, and I didn't have a good enough answer for him. And so the focus of my book changed from being, look at the scary places, to being, look what was done to these people in these asylums, these prisons, these hospitals, especially in the turn of the century, the 18th century, 19th century, Victorian era hospitals, prisons, asylums. We're talking about truly horrific things, and the research on this was very disturbing and heartbreaking for me because of the things, especially in the boys' homes and the children's schools, like Penhurst State School. I don't know if anybody's heard of Penhurst. Those places where children were basically left to rot and die because parents couldn't or wouldn't take care of them. It takes a toll on you, and the research for that one was difficult at times, but I wouldn't have changed it in any way because it put a human face on a scary building. You know, it would remind me of that scene in Patch Adams where the old man is saying, "What do you see? What do you see?" And Patch always says, "4 fingers." No, you're wrong. You're wrong. What do you see? And he finally looks beyond the fingers and he sees the person behind the fingers. And that's what I wanted to set out. That's what I wanted to write about. And that's how I set out about my research, looking at the people and the things that were done to those people and the lives that they led before going into the asylums or prisons, and then hopefully if they ever got out, how they flourished after they got out, if they flourished at all, if they weren't completely broken. So I'm not nearly as happy-go-lucky as an author. I'm an introvert, so it's hard for me to try and make people understand sometimes. But I really hope that I did a good job on this, and I hope that you at least check it out at your libraries. I'm hoping that it shows up there. I think I did a pretty dandy job on it, and I would love to hear from other people if they've written or read it. But you know, and don't discount the internet. The internet is extremely important. The internet as a tool and as a resource is very powerful. I could access medical records in Germany if I wanted to, just by going online and knowing people who could get me access to that. It would, you know, some people might call that cheating. I don't. I call it saving money and time. You know, you're able to get the same records on the internet as you are at the same place. Would I like to go to an asylum in Germany? Yeah, I would love to go to an asylum in Germany. Can I afford it? No. So the use of online databases and online photographic databases, historical records, very important. I think that it's, you know, there shouldn't be an online versus a, you know, in print division. I really also ought to see a kind of a merging together of those two tools. You know, it's best to just work together always than fight it out. So that's about all I have to say. Yeah.
Could I add one thing
Certainly.
about ghost collections? As I tell people, I neither believe nor disbelieve in the reality of ghosts. I simply record them from the local people who send me by email, you know, their stories and things like that. But I don't try to disprove them. I don't try to prove them. I just record them as told by the local people. And they're so pleased that their authentic story is reproduced or is printed in my books that way. And it's amazing when the books come out, the ghost story books are printed, how many telephone calls I get, or maybe a personal contact, and they'll thank me, you know, for including their stories in the book. And the reason I love ghost story books, ghost stories, is because they start off by telling you, for example, about an old house, exactly where it was located, how many rooms it had in it, and how many rooms are upstairs, perhaps, and who slept in what room, and the weird personality of Aunt Jane or Uncle Ben, and then suddenly here comes a ghost. But all of these stories in my books typically start off by describing something, you know, about the house or the people who experienced it before they actually get into the honest goodness of that. That is, before they get into the telling of the story itself. They like to provide all of these essential details that will cause more people to believe in the reality of what they experienced.
That's good. That leads into the question I was going to ask, and what makes a place become known as haunted? What have you found in doing your research? Ben, obviously you have been looking at asylums. Do you hear stories that make you think of that it has that ghostly aspect, or?
I've heard lots of stories about lots of different places, and it goes back to oral traditions. It goes back to the stuff that he does. It's stuff from the Canterville Ghost, you know, and the little ghost that lives down the lane. It's all about oral histories and traditions. Things get passed around for years and years and years. That's right. That's how folklore and urban legends, especially, kind of flourish and stay alive. You know, that's why we hear about the ghost who haunts the old covered bridge or whatever. 300 years or whatever after it happened. Right. That being said, I think that we tend to, as far as haunted places are concerned, a lot of times I think we tend to bring some of that haunting in on ourselves. If we happen to, and it happens all over the place, like at Waverly Hills and at Moundsville and the Mansfield, Ohio State Reformatory, some of the things that happen in there. So you automatically already take some of that in with you. You look for that. Your mind sees some of that stuff. What I like are the people that have absolutely no clue what went on in those places, and then they see something, and that's even better than taking someone who's a scholar of that sort of place, But I said it in my opening. I definitely believe that things have happened to me, and I think personal experiences change you a lot, but it's very difficult to get other people to jump on that wagon with you sometimes.
Many skeptics around. Madeleine, what was your experience? I know you said you used Brookline in Massachusetts as a...
Oh, that's the fictional one.
Oh, okay.
That one does not exist. I don't know. I feel like, I agree. I feel like a lot of your prior knowledge of a place can inform how you end up feeling about it. I grew up in a house that's old, and I believe I saw a ghost in it once. My story is not scary. It's actually just sad and sort of wistful. But But what's strange to me is like my family none of my family members had anything like that happen, and it always made me wonder, like, well, what was different? Like, what was different about me, or why did I see this, or why do I like feel these things and they don't? And I don't know if it's like some people are more empath, like, you know, they just have like great, like a different kind of empathy. Not that my family is not empathetic, that would be a terrible thing to say, but they're wonderful people. But, you know, I feel like some people, like, you're just more in tune to it, or you're sort of like you're or more open to those sorts of feelings, and maybe getting a sense for a presence, or there's some kind of intuition. And I don't know if it's innate, or, you know, I was always a very rambunctious, imaginative child, so I'm sure that might have played into it. You know, I was looking for inspiration in things. I was trying to channel creative energy, and maybe in some way that invites, you know, a different kind of intuition. But yeah, I don't know what makes a place, you know, because I feel like you can have energies of great joy as well as great pain and sadness. So I don't think it has to be, you know, something tragic happened. I think it could be anything. And yeah, and like I said, you know, my family, they don't get the feeling that I get in parts of my house. And so, you know, it's so personal. And I wonder too if maybe there are people who walk into a you know, officially haunted place and don't feel anything. Like, I'm sure that could be a thing as well. So I don't know what makes a place haunted. I mean, you know, like, maybe it's just as much about the person, you know, walking in the door as it is about whatever happened before.
In the house.
I didn't
What
want
do
that
you
to
think?
rhyme. That was weird.
Well,
Tom?
I think that, you know, we have these physical bodies. We're created by nature or God, however you look at it. And I think we're hardwired to have a constant feedback loop with the spirit world, with the universe. So, for instance, ghost hunters have the EMF meters. But when I tell ghost stories, I say that we have a built-in meter. It's right here in your solar plexus. And it will tell you when you walk into a place you're not supposed to be, the alarm will go off and it'll let you know. And people do that. I know stories from real estate agents, and they don't know that a house is traumatized. They don't know that there was a suicide there. So they just kind of blithely, innocently, you know, take another couple to go take a look at this nice house. And someone has a very visceral reaction. So, you know, we're feeling people. You know, we're created to feel. And so I think what makes a place haunted is our interaction with the environment, because we have antennae. You know, we have a psychic sense, we have intuition, we feel things, we can feel a vibe in the air, we can feel objects, we can pick up that old, you know, object, Civil War sword, or the boot, or that item of clothing, whether you call it telekinesis or whatever. And we get information, we read information. And of course, there's intuitives or psychics that do that. You can hand them grandma's ring, they'll get quiet, centered on themselves, and then they'll start telling stories about grandma, you know, that are accurate. So I think the world, the environment, both what's out there and within ourselves, because we're part of the environment too, you know. So we're these finely tuned instruments, and we will pick up, you know, you can't help but feel it. You know, just like if you have two harps next to each other and you hit the A string on one and then the A string on the other will vibrate. That's sympathetic vibration. Well, same as if you go into a haunted location, and if you have any kind of experience in sadness in life, and who doesn't, you're going to feel the sadness that's inherent in that, or the joy, you know, if there were joyful vibes in that place. So the problem is, in the Western world, we make this assumption that we, you know, pound on the table. I won't mess up the microphone here today and do that, but imagine me pounding on the table, and we say this is real. And then we say the spirit world is kind of iffy. But that's only a world assumption that we make, and then we socialize and teach to every one of our children. And then we labor under this difficulty, because here we are in the Western world saying, you know, we walk into the post office, seeing the guy, you know, walk into the post office, as one lady did in Clarksville, Indiana, and then she saw the man walk through the station, you know, the physical table where you write down, you know, and fill out your forms. So that doesn't, you know, cogitate well with us, because that's the way we're raised in the Western world. On the other hand, if you go to a lot of tribal societies around the planet, they make the exact opposite world assumption. They point to the spirit world and say, Junior, this is real. And then they hit the table and knock on it and go, and then this is an illusion. So we have a totally topsy assumption, and we don't teach our children to respect and interact with the spirit world. except in a few exceptions, maybe some fundamentalist Christians might acknowledge, but then they might posit that in the framework of negativity, that every spirit is negative or bad. So every time we go into a haunted location or have an experience, or as the adults here that were children once in the haunted homes, that's an opportunity for our children to talk to us. But many times the adults in our lives don't want to hear it. No, there's nothing under your bed, Junior, or that's just your imagination, or I don't want to hear about that. One girl...
Yeah, but can you imagine telling your kid, yeah, there is something under your bed? Like,
I have a story. A lady, Bonnie Phillips, she clears homes in Louisville. She has a story where there was something under the bed, and I can tell you that story. Now, when I talk to the children, do they want the truth? Well, you can tell them everything's fine, honey. There's nothing under the bed. There's nothing in the closet.
The conversation, I imagine, was pretty
Well, a boy walked into the breakfast in Hawaii and said, Mom, God is walking through the walls at night. So it doesn't make sense. It's totally absurd. Yeah. Well, it turns out he had just seen Bruce Almighty. God was an African-American man, right? Morgan Freeman.
Yeah.
So he was seeing a native Hawaiian man walking through the walls at night. He was using the best possible language he had as a 7-year-old boy. So what are we going to do at that moment? Are we going to wave our hand and say, oh, honey, those things don't exist? Are we going to give kids the straight shot? And I think, sometimes there are things under the bed.
I wasn't disagreeing with you. I was more the humorous element of like sitting a child down and saying, yes, there is something under here, but we're going to take care of it. We're going to take care of it, but like there is.
I thought it was hilarious.
Okay, thank you. A+ anecdote. Okay.
Well, I think it's all about boundaries. And someone wrote a book called Do Dead People Watch Us Shower? So we don't have these conversations in our society, but at some point people do. I have a lot of stories of ghosts in bathrooms, so.
I'm going to think about that every time I shower now. Thank you for that.
I'm just saying it's about boundaries.
I give them a show though, like sing and.
Well, in Henderson, there was Henderson, and just north of Henderson, obviously is now Indiana, but that wasn't always the case because the river moved. And so they ended up, putting Ellis Park there because it was a no man's land, because it wasn't Kentucky, it wasn't Indiana, and the gamblers ended up coming down from Chicago. So I know a story from a haunted house in Henderson, and it was one of the mobsters, and so he's fond of still coming in, and it was a co-ed, and she was there in the bathroom, and that's when he liked to come in and have a gawk. But what did we teach our children? Once again, it gets back to, I think, these stories that Lynwood collects, personal experiences, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, we need to have these out in society and in journal for discussion, and also for our children, for their benefit. I think we need to honor their experiences, because they will come in and they will talk about things that we maybe don't want to hear.
Well, that leads into another question.